Today, we're going to be speaking with Chris Smalls, who is a former Amazon employee who has become a leader of the e-commerce and labor rights movement. Chris is going to tell us about his work for and his subsequent firing from Amazon. Now, of course, we haven't been able to independently confirm Chris's story, but it is a compelling one, and I am more than open to having someone from Amazon on to talk to us about the things that Chris is going to tell us. Chris, you have a background that started similar to mine, which is your background is in retail. I worked at the now defunct Circuit City when I was much younger. You worked at Walmart and Target. But let's talk a little bit about your work for Amazon. How did you come to work at Amazon?
I started working at Amazon back in 2015. I came in entry level. I came from before Amazon. I was working at a grocery distribution warehouse overnight, graveyard shift. It was unionized, but the union contract just wasn't what I expected it to be. So I thought that I have a better opportunity at Amazon. I opened up the first building in Carteret, New Jersey, EWR9. Stayed there for about 2 years, and then I transferred to BDL2, Connecticut. And then my last facility was JFK Staten Island. So I've been with the company for almost 4.5 years.
And what was your day to day? Like, what kind of roles were you in?
So when I first got hired, I was entry level. I was what they call a picker. My job was to pick customer items in a timely manner within the hour. Hourly rate of about back then it was about 250 items an hour. Now it's a lot more. It's about 400 now. But I did that for about 6 to 7 months, and then I was promoted up to a process assistant, better known as an assistant manager. And I was in that position for the last 4 years.
Now, as an assistant manager, were you supervising pickers?
Yes, I actually was supervising pickers, and then it expanded to a different operation, which now I was in control of three different departments. So picking, counting, and also floor health. So floor health was also a part of the department as well.
Okay, so many people in my audience have probably seen the articles that talk about the conditions for the pickers, and they include things like you're not allowed to go to the bathroom, and there's this constant pressure to pick more and more and more, and the conditions are bad, and your breaks are monitored down to the minute. Talk a little bit about what of that was true when you were there. Is any of it not true?
No, it's 100% true. Amazon is ran completely off of metrics and numbers. They calculate everything. It's actually calculated down to the second. The second you stop scanning the item, your time accumulates of time off task. So I was a part of that machine. I very much had to monitor my associates in my department. But like I said, I was just a supervisor that related to them. So they respected the fact that I wasn't that type of supervisor that would be hard on them if they came back late from break or whatever the case may be, because I know how massive these buildings are and how the working conditions can take a toll on your body.
Now, were you pressured, even though you weren't pressuring the pickers maybe the way that you would be expected to? Did that cause a problem for you?
Absolutely. I mean, for the most part, it caused a problem with my own personal career growth because obviously management knew that I would never side with them when it came to certain things like that. I was kind of like the black sheep of the supervisors. Everybody knew that I had a backbone, and I always spoke up for what was right. And I always sided with the employees at entry level because that's where I started from. I never forgot where I came from, and it didn't bother me. But it definitely hindered my career there. I applied for a salaried manager position there 49 times, and I was denied every last one of them. And it's probably because the fact that they knew that I would never be fully pro Amazon.
What reason were you given the 49 times why you weren't going to be given the salaried manager?
Well, on my own personal experiences, it was basically bogus. A lot of the interviews were set up for me to fail from the beginning. A lot of them, the interviews, they already knew who they wanted in those positions before I even applied. So it was a combination of a lot of different things. Also, there was letters and management above me that didn't like me as a person, whatever the case may be. So it was a lot of different things of why I didn't get those positions. And I believe it's systemic, systemic racism that exists inside Amazon as well. Over 1.5 million employees worldwide, and then 26 years of existence, only 8% of the management is black or brown. So that just tells you right there, the higher up the food chain, the less likely, you are to be colored. So I even believe this for the first time this past year, they have one black woman that's on the senior team.
Hmm.
So that just tells you right there, the chances of me getting promoted up the ladder was slim.
And Chris, I'm not familiar with the numbers you're citing, so I'm curious. When you say 8%, is that globally or in the United States?
That's globally.
That's globally. Okay. Do you know what it is in the United States?
I would guess it would be a lot less than that. I'm pretty sure it's not too many of us up at the top. Once again, in this company's 26 or 27 years of existence, for the first time ever, they put one black woman on the senior team, the S team they call it. So that just tells you right there, they're way behind the eight ball when it comes to diversity, when it comes to management.
Were there ways in which working at Amazon was better than when you did actual customer facing retail like Walmart and Target?
Of course, I worked at competitors and I worked during the holiday season. And nothing's worse than working Black Friday
Right.
at a Target. When you got customers trying to get their items and the lines are backed up and everything's chaos. So working in the warehouse, you have to deal with customers. It's a benefit, but once again, it's also calisthenics. So I used to tell my employees, new hires, if you have a gym membership, you might want to cancel it.
Now, ultimately, you were fired by Amazon. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, the beginning of the pandemic, late February, early March, when this virus came into the country in Seattle, killing the senior citizens over there, I was afraid over here on the East Coast, and I tried to raise health and safety concerns going through the proper channels. And after doing that for a few weeks, I tried organizing workers inside the warehouse, sitting in the cafeteria 10 hours a day off the clock. Telling as many workers as I can after I learned in the meeting with my bosses that we had cases in the facility and they didn't want me to tell anybody, not to cause a panic or disrupt business. So I felt that I had to take further action. And after a whole week of advocating, pleading, and going back and forth with the general manager of the building, they decided to quarantine just me out of everybody else. And that didn't make sense to me. Not even the person I ride to work with, none of the people in my department that was around the person who was infected. It was just me. So I knew they were using me as a target. And as a result, I held a protest on March 30th outside of my facility. And then 2 hours later, I was terminated over the phone. A week after that, Jeff Bezos and his top general counsel, David Sapolsky, they tried to run a smear campaign on me, calling me not smart or articulate, and make me the whole face of the whole unionizing efforts.
So there's a couple different things here, right? I mean, one is that the part about infections at the facility, and the other is trying to organize the workers. So let's talk about the first one first.
Sure.
So you were told by managers not to talk about the fact that there were infected employees?
Absolutely. Yes, on March 24th, we had our daily sync meeting, which we have every single day. And that's pretty much giving us the rundown for the rest of the day and how it's supposed to go. But on that day, it was different. That day, they told us we had a case that was actually 2 weeks prior for the first time. And they pretty much told the supervisors not to say anything. And I just felt that was wrong. I felt like I had to say something that took my stance there. That was the last day I worked for Amazon.
So that was a supervisor's meeting, and you guys were told not to mention the case to the employees you supervise?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then separately, but around the same time, you were working to organize the workers there. And what was the point of the organization? To approach management about virus related matters or to collectively bargain on salary and benefits?
Well, actually, that was the first time I learned about it. I haven't even started organizing yet. That was March 24th. What I was doing was behind the scenes. I was sending out emails to the governor, to Governor Cuomo's office, to the CDC department of Manhattan, media. I was trying to fight behind the scenes. It wasn't until after that meeting, the next day when I came back to the facility, I told my supervisor I won't be working for the remainder of the week. And that's when I started to go in the cafeteria and tell all the workers that I came in contact with the truth, that you possibly been working around somebody who tested positive. From that point forward, what we did every morning, a small group of us marched into the general manager's office and voiced our concerns.
Yeah.
Amazon has this thing called Voice of Associates, where associates are allowed to write on the board their complaints. So I said, you know what? Here is your Voice of Associates board right here in person. Here's our complaints. We wanted the building to just be simply closed down and sanitized. We would have came back to work no problem. That's all we wanted in the beginning, but obviously a lot more now.
What was officially given to you as the reason why you were being let go?
They claim that I violated socially distance policies that none of us ever read or ever, implemented.
Huh.
As a supervisor, I'm supposed to receive the policies and relay that information, and I never did. So they didn't exist because they didn't know what we were dealing with, and that's all. It was okay to understand that they didn't know what they were dealing with and how to handle it, but to ignore the fact that workers with underlying health conditions, mothers that were pregnant, parents that have children at home, including myself, were afraid to come to work and refuse to listen to us. That's a whole nother story.
When it comes to what you're fighting for now, if I understand correctly, you're looking to organize sort of a non-union nationwide group of workers. Am I right that you're going the non-union approach, and what made you decide to go about it that way?
Yeah, I feel like with Amazon, it's such a large entity and a large business that it actually would be kind of difficult for one union to try to unionize the entire nation. We're talking 800,000 workers. So I felt like an organization that has a worker-driven committee would be more beneficial for Amazon workers. Something that's worker employee controlled, uh, but union-like structure. I feel like that's the best way possible. It's sort of like cutting out the middleman. No, no union dues or whatever the case may be. But workers are allowed to sit in on negotiation, negotiate their own contracts, and then now we also have enough power, workers' power, that if Congress say you're an essential worker and you have to go to work in the middle of a pandemic,
Right.
we're going to say no. We're not going to work until we have PPE provided by the company, hazard pay, medical leave, all these things that we're demanding before we consider ourselves essential workers. So
That's
that's what I
interesting.
try to.
So absent the actual union with the dues, sort of like at what level would you see this working? Would it be at the individual facility level? Would it be at a regional level, or how would you structure that?
Yeah, I thought about it, and I think regional would be better. If you had just one, you break down the country into regions. You have a committee, a workplace committee that represents that region, because we know the cost of living in different parts of the country is different. Uh, these committees negotiate the contract, and there you go. That be able to, take care of the mass of the employees that work for Amazon. With unionizing, you have to do it facility by facility, and that's going to be a longer process. As you can see, what they're doing in Alabama, they're prolonging it. They're union busting.
Yeah.
They're firing workers. They're hiring workers. They're doing all these things to disrupt it. But if you have a workplace committee, that's something that's built internally. It's going to be hard to bust that up.
Did you ever see or experience or become aware of sort of like not union busting, but maybe union prevention activity by Amazon?
Absolutely. Well, as a supervisor, I watched, those training videos. We had to take tests, assessment tests. They try to mix in certain questions that obviously related to union busting, but I never applied them. Like I said, I'm always on the employee entry level position side, so I never applied these things. Obviously there was management that applied that, and they still do. But you just have to understand what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a company that's anti-union from the beginning, and now we see that it's very much necessary that they are unionized.
Yeah, I remember in my early days at Circuit City, they sat me down and mixed in with training videos about like how to use the sales systems and what the process is for requesting time off. They throw in videos about, we want to maintain a direct relationship with employees.
Right.
We don't want any intermediaries or middlemen. And it was very sophisticated, in fact, the way that it was
Oh
done.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. The same thing. They mix in the questions with like safety and hazmat and all this training. And I'm like, well, you read between the lines. It's usually
Right.
busted.
Yeah. We've been speaking with Chris Smalls, former Amazon employee, now a leader of the e-commerce labor rights movement. Chris, I really appreciate your time, and we're going to continue following your great work.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys for giving me a chance to tell my story.